Welcome. Thanks for attending. Today we're going to be talking about keeping students challenged in Read Naturally Encore II. So that is our paper-based program, the Read Naturally strategy with audio CDs and Blackline Masters. Today we have one handout that is linked in your chat box and was also linked in your reminder emails. When we are monitoring student performance, there are two separate phases of monitoring student performance. The first one listed under, in the first bullet point listed on the slide that I'm showing is checking the student's placement after 3 stories. I presented a webinar on that not long ago. So if your students have only passed 1, 2, or 3 stories, it is best to watch that session first because that's the part of monitoring performance that we do initially. So once your students have passed 3 stories, checking initial placement is exactly what it sounds like, right? You're taking the data from the first 3 stories and you're checking to see if they were placed right. It's a very important part of implementing Read Naturally Encore because struggling readers are very inconsistent. And so placement day is just one day. It's just a very short period of time. So it's very important that teachers take a look at how they did after the first few stories and make sure they're in the right spot. Okay. Checking initial placement is a process that's valid for up to 6 stories is what our guideline is. Once your students have passed 7 or more stories, then you are in the phase that we're going to talk about today. Then you are in what we call to keep students challenged over time. So that's what we're talking about today. Students' data needs to be at 7 or more stories for this to be a process that will work well. Whenever you are talking about and thinking about monitoring how your students are doing within the program, we always want, of course, to maximize their achievement, right? Struggling readers do not have time on their side. We need them to make as much progress as possible in as short amount of time as possible. And so we want our students to be challenged by the level of material that they are working in. But we don't want them to be frustrated, right? We all know that if a goal is challenging, it is incredibly more rewarding, right? Also, if students are working in text that's challenging, they're being exposed to concepts and words that are a little more difficult than if they were working in content that was not challenging. So the level of the stories that the students are working in needs to be as challenging as possible before they get too frustrated. The next piece, of course, is the story goal within the program. And so by story goal, I mean that final time you listen to your student read the passage. We call it the hot timing or the pass timing. And that's, you have a story, each student has a story goal for that point. You want students to have to work hard to reach that story goal. Okay, so if they're only having to practice once or they're getting very close to their story goal on their cold timing, that's an indication that a change needs to be made, because it is only through hard work that an accelerated amount of achievement can happen, right? And so if they're not having to work hard to reach their goals, it's an opportunity lost. And so we want them to be in as level as hard as possible and a goal that is as challenging as possible. The place that you look for this data is in the report or the graph that your students fill out. Okay, so it looks, I'm sure your students' graphs don't look quite this neat because they're coloring them in with their red and blue pencils and what have you. But this is about what it looks like. So you're going to be taking the information from these reports for each student, and you're going to be making a decision about whether or not students have made enough progress to indicate that a change is needed. Okay, so you're basically taking a look at students' data points when they started. I'm going to go back to that graph for one more moment. The first 3 stories students passed, the first 3 bar graphs on this bar graph that's on the left-hand side, as well as the first 3 comprehension points, as well as hot timing points, those sorts of things. You're taking that average number and comparing it to the average number on the most recent 3. And it's with that comparison where we are looking for an increase in the following things. Their cold timing has improved. Their average hot timing or pass timing has improved. Their quiz score has gone up. Their hot timing is now above their goal by a double digit, by 10 or more. Okay. The practices have gone down. So why would that be important? Well, students have to practice until they meet their story goal, right? And they're not going to be able to meet their story goal in that final timing unless they've practiced sufficient number of times. So if a student is able to meet their story goal after 6 practices when they start working in the program, and now they only have to practice 3 times, well, that's an indication that they're able to become automatic with these words more quickly. So that's an indication of progress. And then finally, student behavior. If you see a change in that, oftentimes it's a change is needed. An adjustment to their story level goal, the way they do the steps is needed. If your students loved this program in August and September, and now they're not quite as into it, many of them are probably ready for more of a challenge. And so look for that. It's not in your data report, it's just in your gut, right? It's in your teacher intuition. So that is a very valuable piece of information that those reports won't tell you, but you know it yourself. So when you are when you decide that you're going to make a change, you're going to increase the challenge, we recommend you only change one thing at a time. So if you decide to change a student's story goal, you're going to leave them in the same level that they're working in now. If you decide to change their level, then you're going to leave their story goal as it is now. After 12 stories, you are more likely to raise a goal. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that you have an option because we have 12 more stories, right? So there's 24 nonfiction stories in each level. In our trainings, we recommend that you break them into 2 groups of 12, odd stories and even stories. And the reason we do that is because it is a natural reminder to teachers that after 12 stories, you should look at the students' data. Most kids are ready for a change by 12 stories. Some are ready before that. Some might not quite be ready, but it's a natural reminder because after a student passes the 12 stories that you gave him originally, he has to come to you for the second set of 12 stories in that level. So it's going to make you think, oh, yeah, he needs another set of 12 stories. I better look at his data and see if I can give him harder level or higher goal. Okay. After 24 stories, you have to raise the level. There's only 24 stories in each level. I will tell you, most students do not need all 24 stories. Some do. A little bit, it depends on whether or not they fell in near the bottom of the range on placement day or the top of the range on placement day, right? That's going to make a difference. But most kids are ready for a challenge before 24 stories. The final thing that you always need to think about, and it's very, very important, and that is what the student's long-term fluency benchmark goal is. So what do I mean by that? We have to have a common definition, or we can't talk about something unless we agree on what we mean by it, right? So when you're considering a long-term fluency goal, what I mean by that is that your student is able to read unpracticed grade level passages at, near, or above the 50th percentile on national norms. Now, I'm a person who likes examples. I like to be able to picture the kids, the students, the whole situation in order for me to understand it well. So I'll give you an example. What a third grader's long-term fluency benchmark goal is to read a third grade passage at the 50th percentile the very first time the third grader reads a third grade passage. Okay, so it's unpracticed, grade level, around the 50th percentile. So back in August or September, you did probably fall assessments, right? And based on how your students did on those fall assessments, that is what determined your intervention group. So here are fall 50th percentile norms for 1st through 6th grade. We don't want them where they needed to be in the fall. Their long-term fluency goal is to get them where they need to be in the spring, right? This is going to be possible for some of your students. It's not going to be possible for all of your students, right? If you have a 6th grader who's reading at a 2nd grade level, you may not be able to get them up to 6th grade in 1 year. It might take 2 or so. But if your students are just a couple years below, 1 or 2 years below, you're likely able to get them up to grade level, 50th percentile, unpracticed grade level material by the spring of the year. Okay. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to talk you through a sample student, Lee. We're going to go through a process of determining whether or not he needs more of a challenge. And I will tell you that is usually the easy part. Okay. It's pretty easy to see whether or not he's making progress in the various areas. The bigger question is, well, what do we do once we have made a decision to make a change? Which change do we make? So we're going to cover both of those decisions. Here are those 5 points that I talked to you about. Remember a few slides ago, it was improvement in cold timing, hot timing, their average hot timing score compared to their goal, their quiz improving, and their number of practices decreasing. So we're looking for at least progress in at least 2 of those areas. Here is the data that you're going to look at, right? My red box just went around the specific data of how the student did on each story. So let me zoom in on that. Okay, so this large box that's just white and black, that is a blown up image of where this red circle is. So the first question is whether or not Lee's cold timing score has improved. So you take the average of the first 3 stories, 41, 39, 42. So the average there is 41, right? And you compare it to the average of the most recent 3 stories, 51, 49, and 44. I don't even have to take the average to know that there's progress there, right? If you do the formal math on that, it would be 41 to start with, and now he's at 48. Okay, his hot timing score started at 74, now it's averaged at 80. The difference between his hot timing score average and his goal is now 10, right? If you average 79, 81, and 80, the average of those 3 numbers is 80. And the difference between his average hot timing score and his goal is a double-digit difference. So when that happens, when their hot timing is a double-digit difference away from their goal, consistently, not one day, not one random Wednesday when they were in a really good mood and read a story about a topic they love, right? We have to watch for patterns, which is why taking the average is very important. One data point can be misleading. That's why we take the average of the first 3 and compare it to the average of the most recent 3, so we get a more solid number. I can take a look at his quiz. If you notice in the right-hand side where we have this report that says comprehension, and it's in black and white, and then of course blue, you can see that on the first 3 stories, he missed 2 quiz questions. On the most recent 3 stories, he only missed 1. So that's gone up from good, started out strong with 87, now he's even stronger at 93. His practices have gone from 6 down to 5. So he definitely needs more of a challenge. Okay, remember I said that's the easy part. You just have to take a look at the data and see whether or not he's made progress in at least 2 or more of those areas. So the question becomes, do we raise a goal or do we raise a level? What do we do? Well, we have 3 questions that we ask about that. And it has to do with, the first one is, how many stories has he passed? Because if he's at 24 or getting really close to 24, raising his level is likely going to be what you have to do, right? Because he's out of story. If he's at 12, you have more options. But you also always want to think of what Lee's long-term fluency goal is, right? It's to read grade level material the first time around the 50th percentile. And then, is he closer to meeting his long-term benchmark rate or level? So his long-term benchmark goal for level is I want him reading grade level material. If he's a third grader, I want him reading third grade level material. His rate goal is the 50th percentile in the spring of the year for third graders. Okay, so which is he closer to with the curriculum-based measurement data that you have in Read Naturally Encore? Okay, so let's ask these questions one at a time with all the data present that you need to answer these questions. So the first question is, how many stories has Lee completed, 12 or 24? Well, this, if you've been using the program a long time, you probably know this it's filled in all the way. So it's 12 stories. It's not a 24-story graph. So he's only passed 12. His long-term fluency benchmark goal as a third grader, Lee is a third grader, is to read 112 words correct per minute on third grade level material the first time by the end of the school year. That's his benchmark goal from a rate standpoint. Okay, level standpoint, we want him reading third grade level material. So which is he closer to? Is he closer to rate or level? Well, his average cold timing score right now is 48 words correct per minute. That's his most recent average cold timing score. We want him at 112. He has to more than double his cold timing rate in order to be where his peers will be in the spring. That's a lot. He's got a long way to go from a rate standpoint. But Lee is a third grader working in level 2.5. So he's only half a grade level below his peers right now. Okay. When you have a student who is reading close to grade level, you have the luxury of fewer concerns, right? A student who's reading close to grade level is being exposed to vocabulary and content that is similar to their peers. An eighth grader reading at a second grade level, now we got another problem. We have a rate issue, we have an automaticity issue with the rate, but we also have a content and vocabulary issue. So we have these pulling issues. But when they're reading fairly close to grade level, which he is, he's much closer to level. When a student is much closer to level, we recommend raising the student's goal. Okay. The reason we do that is because he has a much longer way to go to get to the appropriate pace than he does to get to the appropriate difficulty. Now, Lee's comprehension scores were strong. Remember from the slide a few slides back, he started at 87 and he went to 93. And I will often have teachers say to me during this training, well, his comprehension's so strong. Don't you think we should put him in a higher level? And it's attractive to want to do that. And the reason we don't, now I'm going to stop myself right there for a moment. This is one of the many areas in education and in life in general that is nuanced, right? It's not on or off, left or right, up or down. There's this gray area. But we would recommend in this case to raise the goal because he's being exposed to content that's pretty similar to his peers. And he has a long way to go on rate. So I have the luxury of really focusing in on that automaticity. And even though his quiz is strong, his cold timing score is very, very low. Think about 48 words in an entire minute. He is struggling with those words. We don't want to give him more challenging words until he becomes more proficient with the difficulty of the words in the level he's working in. Okay, so we're going to raise his goal and leave his level the same. When we raise a goal, we raise by 10 words. If we raise a level, we usually raise by half a year. Sometimes you might raise by a whole year, but it's a rare situation. And then finally, we discuss the change with the student. And want to just talk about this for just one moment, because there's a couple important reasons that we do this. The first one is obvious, and it's because it's a fun conversation to have. It's going to make your student feel good. It's going to make you feel good. The parents are going to be happy about it if they hear about it. Everybody wants to have this conversation. And in education, this is not always the case, right? Oftentimes we have to have conversations that nobody wants to have, not you or your student or their parents or anybody. So this is a fun conversation where there's a reward. He feels good about himself, so it's positive. So we want to take advantage of any opportunity we have for that. But the more subtle reason, and maybe the more important reason, is that the student, if you discuss the change with the student, if you get his opinion on what he thinks should be done, it helps him understand on a deep level that he is responsible for his reading growth, right? You can't read for him. At the end of the day, it's on him whether or not he gets better at reading. You can create a beautiful room with a perfect environment for reading. You can do tons of research and find the right curriculum. You can spend tons of time and money to create an incentive program that's going to make kids motivated. You can do all of those things to create an environment that is very good for learning. But he has to do the reading. You can't read for him. And that is what's going to make him better, right? That's one of the things this program does beautifully, is it gets kids in the act of reading a lot. And so you can tell him that, hey, this is on you. You have to be the one that does the reading. But having him experience the decision-making process helps him internalize that fact. It helps him see that, oh yeah, I am in charge of this. So Lee's old goal was 70. You remember what the last slide said, you might be able to think of what his new goal might be. We recommend raising by 10 at a time typically. So Lee's new goal would be 80. So he's going to keep working in 2.5, and now his goal is going to be 80. Now, you'll check him again after, maybe 18 stories, whatever the case might be, and he may be ready for a higher level after 18 or 20 or do all 24. But for now, we're going to leave him in 2.5 and give him a goal of 80. So one question we have now is, let's fast forward. It's no longer winter, thank heavens. I'm in Minnesota, so the idea of no longer winter is nice. But let's pretend that it's the spring, and we have some more information on Lee to decide, is Lee done with intervention? Is he ready to exit? The most important information, the gold standard, if you will, that is needed to make this decision is formal assessment data. Okay, so in the fall, formal assessment data got him into your intervention group. He was reading 36 words correct per minute as a third grader in the fall. That's down around the 10th percentile. He was really struggling. He ended up in your room. It's the spring now, and now he's reading 85 words correct per minute. He's made a ton of progress. He's made more progress than his peers. He's catching up. Is it enough for him to be done? Well, in Read Naturally Encore, you get curriculum-based measurement data all the time. And so here it is. He's working in 3.5. His cold timing score is 80. Now, curriculum-based measurement data is not as good as formal assessment data, but it comes in more often. So it is something that as teachers we peek at and we use to try to gauge whether or not the progress is there, right? Because we can't wait all the way till winter assessment. We can't wait all the way till spring assessment. If he's not making progress, we need to make a change now. So you're going to peek at curriculum-based measurement data. And as you can see, his average cold timing score is 80, which is pretty close to his spring assessment. He's working in 3.5 as a third grader, so he's working on grade level. This 80 is a cold timing. It's an unpracticed grade level passage. Okay, so he's reading at grade level. Unpracticed, he's at 80. Is he ready to exit? As the third grader, by the spring of the year, we want their their unpracticed timing scores on third grade level material to be at 112. He's at 80. Okay. His spring assessment, his gold standard assessment data is at 85. Now his hot timing score is at 114, but that doesn't matter. He is not ready to exit. Okay. So we bring this up because Hot timing scores cannot be compared to norms. Kids love what their hot timing score is, but it's the exact number is really not that important as educators when you're making these decisions. And you don't want him where he needed to be in the fall with an 80 or an 85, right? We want him at 112. So he is not ready to exit. Now, Lee's a student who made a lot of progress. He's catching up to his peers. Hopefully midway through next year, he'll be caught up and able to exit the intervention. But not all kids make progress like that. So here are some things to consider if your students are not making the progress that you want. The first thing I want you to think about is whether or not your students are completing the steps correctly. Okay. So by that, I mean reading along out loud with their mouths during the read along step, practicing out loud with their mouths during the practice step. You have to make them do it. They have to hear the words, see the words, say the words all at the same time during that read along in order for them to learn words they don't know and in order for them to solidify those difficult high frequency words, right? So they have to do the steps correctly. That's the most common issue when I talk with teachers about their troubles, the kids that they're struggling with, the ones that aren't making progress. Almost always there's an issue with proper implementation of the steps. So look at that first. Okay. The next thing to consider is a program adjustment. What do I mean by that? Well, if I had a fifth grader reading at a second grade level and they weren't making as much progress as I wanted, I might decide that I'm not going to have them write a retell. I'm not going to have them even write a prediction maybe, because that'll give me more time for that student to be in the act of reading. So that might be an adjustment you make. You might decide that you're going to only require that they practice along with the audio support 2 times. Older students don't usually need all 3 times. So that is another adjustment you might make. So there's all these different adjustments that you can make to make the students make more progress. The third item on our list is to apply classroom management. And this is a twofold idea. And the first one, of course, is what I typically think of with classroom management, which would be enforcing proper implementation of the steps, making sure students stay on task, right? That's the job of this teacher. Whether you want to be or not, you have to be good at making kids do things they don't want to do. That's one of the top requirements for teachers. And so that is one part of classroom management, right? Getting them to implement the steps properly, to stay on task. That's that kind of business side of classroom management. But the other piece that I like to talk about for a moment is incentive programs. Now, some people get overwhelmed by incentive programs, and that is only because you're trying to create an incentive program that is too complicated. You can have a very, very simple one. It can be as simple as counting the number of stories passed each week. That can be it. You can have the student write the story on a bulletin board after they pass. Before they pick a new story, they can write it down. You can keep track and provide rewards for students who pass 3 stories in a week. You can keep track of how many stories are passed by the entire group. And if the whole group passes a certain number of stories each week, there's a group reward. So then that's going to give you some peer pressure, right? Johnny's going to want Jane to stay on task so that they can get that group reward. So incentive programs do not need to be complicated to be effective. Other things you can incentivize would be 100% correct on the quiz, 0 errors on their final timing, 4s on expression, those kinds of things that the kids don't tend to care as much about, but we care more about, right? Like all the kids care about, or the kids care a lot about their hot timing score. That is what they value. We are always reminding them that the true point of this program is that they become good understanders, that they comprehend well, that they read accurately and with expression, right? The final, I guess I've got 2 more things. So we've got supplementary instruction is something to think about. If your student is very inaccurate, maybe there's a underlying phonics issue and you need to do an assessment on phonics and fill some phonics holes. Maybe the student is struggling with comprehension because of vocabulary, and you can lean on those glossaries that come with each level. Students, there's on our website, we have crossword puzzles. You can have them do crossword puzzles with those glossaries to work on vocabulary. So some supplemental instruction. And then finally, just adjusting a level or a goal sometimes makes a bigger difference than you would think. So that is something to consider as well. All right, our final task today is going to talk about the 3 students of Jeff, John, and Janelle. And we're going to talk about a little bit of information that the teacher has that a report doesn't have. And I'm also going to talk about when you might make different decisions based on the traits of the student. Okay, so let's start with Jeff. The note about Jeff is right here. He self-times for his cold timing. He has a positive attitude and he works well. Okay, so his cold timing, he self-times. That means I can't trust it totally, right? But he's working hard, he's on task, he's upbeat. So our first question is, has his cold timing score improved? Well, his cold timing score, trust me if you're either get your readers or trust me that I'm telling you what this slide says. His cold timing score started at 61, it's still at 61, so we don't see progress there. His hot timing score has gone up a little bit. The difference between his hot timing and his goal is 10 or more. His quiz has gotten quite a bit better. Look at the first 3. He got 2 wrong on each, 2 out of 6 wrong. So he had 4 out of 6 correct. And now he's only getting 1 out of 6 wrong. So he's making quite a bit of progress with his quiz. And his practices have been cut in half. He was practicing 6 times on average, and now he's down to 3. Okay, so it's not a difficult decision. He needs more of a challenge. That's the easy decision. The harder decision is, what is it that we do? So Jeff has only passed 12 stories, so we can make either choice. His long-term fluency benchmark goal, he's a 3rd grader, so it's 112 words correct per minute. He's reading 61 words correct per minute, and he's a 3rd grader on 3.0. So he's like Lee, right? He's reading the same difficulty of material that his peers are, but he's way slow. So that gives me the need to work on rate, to keep him in this level, keep him on 3.0, but give him more of a challenge from a story goal standpoint. So we would raise Jeff's goal to 100. Okay. Now, John is a student who, if you take a note under at the bottom of my slide here, it says, John makes too many errors to pass on the first attempt. Okay, so we all have a student like this. Sometimes he's one of those speed demons, and you knew he was going to be like that because of the pace he entered the room on the first day of school, right? We all have students who are like that. Some students have make too many errors because they're not doing the steps properly. So there might be different reasons, but we can't tolerate that, right? Inaccuracy cannot be tolerated. So if you picked this data apart on John, what you would find is that he's making almost no progress. He's making tiny bits of progress, but not a lot. From a technical standpoint, he might be making enough to, he made a little bit of progress on his cold timing, a little bit of progress on his hot timing, which is technically 2, but he's making too many errors to pass on his first attempt. Should you raise his goal or level? Should you give him harder words if he's struggling with accuracy on the difficulty of the words he's working in now? No, you can't give him harder words. Should you make him try to go faster? No, because if he tries to go faster, he's going to be even more inaccurate. So at this point, you're going to provide guidance for John. Okay. Now, if John had an issue with comprehension, I'm going to pop back here. If you look, John is doing okay on his quiz. He got 2 out of 7, 1 out of 7, and 1 out of 7 wrong on the last 3. So he's doing okay on his quiz. But if he was bombing his quiz, you would need to lower Jeff's level. Nobody wants to lower a student's level, but students don't want to not be able to pass on their first attempt. It's really disheartening. Every time you try to reach your goal in front of your teacher, you don't. Every time you try to get the quiz questions right, you don't. It's disheartening. And so getting them in a little bit lower level for a little bit so that they can see success, then you can pop them back into 5.0. Okay. All right. Our final student is Janelle. Janelle has already had her goal brought up from 75 to 85. That probably happened at checking initial placement, right? And she's showing signs of boredom. So we see tremendous progress. This is a report. You don't even have to do any math. Look at this cold score. Look at the hot score. Clearly, it's going up dramatically. Her retails are going up. If you look at these numbers down here, you can see her errors started out at 5, 2, and 0. Now her errors are at 1, 2, and 2. Okay, so her errors on the cold timing are going down. Her errors on the hot timing are going down. So she's making progress all over the place. You don't even really need to do the math on this. Just know, like, well, yep, clearly she needs more of a challenge. So the question then really with Janelle is just, what is it you do? Well, she's a fourth grader working in level 2.5. So she's a year and a half below grade level. And her average cold timing score right now is about 67 words. Okay. And as a fourth grader, we want her at, I think, somewhere around 130 words correct per minute in the spring. So she is closer to her level than she is to goal. Okay. However, if you notice that Janelle has gotten 100% on her quiz 4 times in a row, and with the exception of one story, she's gotten 100% on her quiz 9 times, 8 times out of 9 out of the most recent 9. That tells you something about her content. Her comprehension is amazing, and she's making a tremendous amount of progress. Raising a level is a more difficult increase than raising a story goal. So when you have a graph that looks like Janelle's and the progress is tremendous in every area, be more aggressive with your changes. And making the content harder is a bigger jump than just raising the goal. So with Janelle, I would put her in level 3.0 because she's making tremendous amount of gains. Her comprehension is phenomenal. And I often think about reading growth in the same way that I think about physical child growth, right? If you think back if you had student or children, your own children maybe, who you had to buy new shoes for when they were in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, you bought new shoes every few months and they were adult size and it was expensive and it made you crazy and you thought, I don't know how much longer I can afford this. And then you realize sometime around 8th grade or so that, hey, wait, I haven't had to buy new shoes in a long time because their growing has, kind of hit a plateau. Reading growth can be the same way. And when a student is on a trajectory that is accelerated, they are making a ton of growth. Their confidence is very strong. They feel really good about themselves. They have great attitudes. And so be more aggressive with the change when the student is in that type of a mindset. Okay. So Janelle would move up to level 3.0. Now, remember, it's nuanced, right? There might be certain things you know about a student that might make a slightly different decision than your colleagues might make. Okay, that's okay. The most important thing is that you're monitoring their data and that you're making changes based on what you see in there. We do have a lot of resources on our website. We have a knowledge base, we have videos, and then of course, recordings of webinars like this one. So please go to our website to get resources. Also, feel free to call us, email us with your questions. That's why we're here. So please feel free to shoot us an email or pick up the phone and talk to one of us. We're happy to talk you through concerns you have, issues you're having, maybe data you're not sure what to do with. Do feel free to reach out to us. So thank you all for your time and attention. I appreciate everything you do for struggling readers, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.